Started with animals are great. Thank you. President Trump zeroes in on a nominee for Attorney General, and yes, you may have heard that name before. The arrest of a top executive at a Chinese telecom company sends Wall Street reeling and could have major implications on a U.S.-China trade deal. Plus, how Republican lawmakers in one state are trying to take away a lot of power from the incoming Democratic governor. This is Special Report. Good evening. Welcome to Washington. I'm Bret Baier. We begin tonight with a new Attorney General nominee, possibly, and most definitely one of the wildest rides in a long time on the Wall Street roller coaster. The arrest of a top Chinese tech executive in Canada could provide yet another stumbling block to settling trade differences between the U.S. and the world's most populous country. The arrest and trade uncertainty sent markets into another tailspin today. The Dow was down 780 points before a fierce late-day rebound to finish off just 79. The S&P 500 lost 4. The Nasdaq gained 30. First, back to the future. In the Attorney General search, we now know who President Trump is considering as his next chief of law enforcement. And it's a man who has done that job before. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts is here to tell us who that is from the North Lawn. Good evening, John.
Brett, good evening to you. For the past several weeks, President Trump seemed in no hurry to replace Jeff Sessions permanently, even though he had all that criticism about the interim Attorney General, Matt Whitaker. But suddenly this afternoon, word that the president had settled on a candidate, one who has enjoyed broad bipartisan support. Sources tell Fox News that President Trump wants William Barr to be his next Attorney General. If nominated, it will be a second tour of duty for Barr. He served as Attorney General during the George H.W. Bush administration. A whiz kid from Columbia University and George Washington University Law School, Barr was just 42 when he first became Attorney General. While President Trump doesn't know Barr, they do have one thing in common. Barr fully supported the president's decision to fire FBI Director James Comey last year.
The president is entitled to his choice as FBI director. And while I admire Jim Comey a lot, I think he's contributed a lot to the country. He's enormously gifted. He crossed the basic line back in July, a fundamental line in the department.
As the president looks set to give Barr a thumbs up, the stock market turned thumbs down today on the U.S.-China trade relationship. The reason for the swoon this time? The arrest Saturday of Huawei CFO Meng Wanzhou. Huawei is China's largest telecom company and America's chief competitor for new 5G systems that will revolutionize everything from cell phones to self-driving cars to robotic surgery. At the request of the United States, Meng was arrested by Canadian authorities in Vancouver. The DOJ has been investigating Huawei's possible violation of Iran sanctions and wants to extradite Meng. China is protesting loudly.
China demands them to immediately clarify the reason for the arrest, release the detainee, and safeguard the legitimate rights and interests of the detainee.
The arrest was made on the same day President Trump was having dinner with Chinese President Xi Jinping in an attempt to move U.S.-Chinese trade relations forward. The White House says President Trump did not know about the arrest before his meeting with Xi. National Security Advisor John Bolton on NPR today.
Well, you know, there are a lot of things that are pending at any given time. You don't know exactly what's going to happen in terms of a particular law enforcement action.
Bolton added that Huawei has long been suspected of involvement in intellectual property theft and forced technology transfer on behalf of the Chinese government.
I think this is going to be a major subject of the negotiations that President Trump and President Xi Jinping agreed on in Buenos Aires.
Huawei has been attempting to dominate the global 5G infrastructure, but fearing everything from intellectual property theft to outright espionage. Some countries, including New Zealand, Australia, and Britain, are either eliminating or limiting their use of Huawei products. No word yet on whether Meng's arrest is going to have any impact on the pending U.S.-China trade talks. Brett?
John Roberts live on the North Lawn. John, thanks. Let's look deeper at some of the reasons for what's happening on Wall Street. Susan Lee of the Fox Business Network joins us from New York. Good evening, Susan.
Good evening, Brett. It seems that investors will need to get used to these highly volatile days. We were tracking for another big stock market loss on the fragility of the U.S.-China trade truce after the Huawei arrest in Canada. But then just after 3 p.m., the Wall Street Journal reported that the Federal Reserve may be slowing down rate hikes next year. And that's when things started turning around into the close. Big technology names led the recovery today. Gains at the end for Amazon, Netflix, Facebook, and Google. And that's encouraging to some investors who say we may be at a near-term bottom. Trading volumes were a third higher today than the 1-month average, which suggests investors were buying on conviction, suggesting the losses may have stabilized. But it's already been a tough week for holders of U.S. stocks. Tuesday's 800-point loss was the fourth largest in the Dow's history, with all of the top 4 losses taking place this year. Plunging oil prices continue to be a drag Thursday, with the global oil cartel OPEC unsure of a production cut. And investors were still closely watching the rates on U.S. Treasury notes, worried of a complex but extremely important anomaly called a yield curve inversion. And that's when the rate of the 10-year Treasury bond falls below the 2-year, and that suggests a pessimistic outlook for future growth. A yield curve inversion has preceded nearly every recession since the 1960s, including 2008. And we also had GM's CEO Mary Barra continuing her discussions on Capitol Hill, explaining the company's decision to cut nearly 12,000 American jobs.
General Motors is an American company. That means they should hire American workers. And whenever there is an opportunity to move production from SUVs and others that are being made in Mexico, that production needs to come back to the United States.
Now, GM has said that they will try to shift those affected by the job cuts to other plants across the country. Brett?
Susan, thanks. Speaking of Capitol Hill, the Senate is once again tonight putting the squeeze on President Trump over the suspected involvement of Saudi Arabia's crown prince in the death of a Saudi journalist. This comes as congressional leaders continue efforts to try to reach a budget agreement ahead of a looming partial government shutdown. Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel has the latest from Capitol Hill.
Pressure's building on President Trump to take action against Saudi Arabia for the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi, and it's coming from both sides of the aisle.
This is an open and shut case, it seems, just given what's said publicly. You'd have to willfully be wanting to ignore evidence out there to not know that he was involved.
Illinois Democrat Senator Dick Durbin says the Saudis must pay a price. We should formally expel the Saudi ambassador to the United States, given the Crown Prince's direct involvement in the kidnapping and murder of Jamal Khashoggi. The retiring Senate Foreign Relations chairman says the U.S. should be tough. After all, the Saudis need us.
We've got this out of kilter. Their relationship to us is far more important than our relationship to them. We know that. And yet, everybody's getting this all turned around.
On government funding and the fight over the border wall, Congress just kicked the can 2 more weeks to December 21st. So that battle should come right before Christmas.
We made a lot of progress on 75% of the appropriations. I'd like to conclude it. We've got maybe 2 more weeks, and let's go from there.
Today, the House Democratic leader said she's not willing to consider a DACA deal for some border wall funding. Nancy Pelosi still trying to secure enough votes to be the next speaker, so she's taken a hard line.
Most of us, speaking for myself, consider the wall immoral, ineffective, inexpensive. That isn't how I would interpret a congressional continuing resolution.
Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer says President Trump is just trying to fire up his base.
So if President Trump wants to throw a temper tantrum and shut down the government over Christmas over the wall, that's his decision.
That sets the stage for a meeting between President Trump, Schumer, and Pelosi next Tuesday. This issue of border security, Homeland Security funding is expected to be front and center. Brett?
Mike Emanuel live on the Hill. Mike, thanks. Federal prosecutors say they will not pursue another trial against a Border Patrol agent who fatally shot a Mexican teenager across a border fence. Lonnie Swartz has been acquitted of second-degree murder and involuntary manslaughter, but both times juries deadlocked on lesser charges. Schwartz's attorney says the agent was acting in self-defense and following Border Patrol policy when he fired at least 16 shots at the boy who was throwing rocks at law enforcement officers. We should learn more, a lot more, about the special counsel investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 election in the next 24 hours. We'll also be hearing about the Republican probe of alleged bias at the Department of Justice. Here's Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge on the prospects for a very big day tomorrow.
On Friday, the special counsel probe and House Republican FBI investigation come to a head. Robert Mueller's team will submit memos documenting their allegations that former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort violated his plea agreement. Manafort's legal team argues the special counsel used strong-arm tactics to obtain information their client does not have or evidence that does not exist.
It's a terrible situation for Manafort himself. It's not a great one for the prosecutors either, because they really can't use him as a witness in any case against anybody.
Earlier this week, the special counsel filed the sentencing memo for former National Security Advisor Mike Flynn with heavy redactions. A similar effort to shield sensitive information is expected in the Manafort filing, and a separate sentencing memo for Michael Cohen, the president's former personal attorney. Court records show Cohen, who cut a deal last week over lying to Congress about a 2016 Trump-Moscow real estate project, has participated in 7 voluntary interview meetings with the special counsel's office. Legal observers predict the next few weeks will be telling.
If there aren't any new indictments, that would tell you that he's really preparing a report to deliver to the Congress about what his investigation has uncovered relative to the president and the campaign.
After withdrawing legal efforts to quash a congressional subpoena, former FBI Director James Comey is on Capitol Hill Friday for a rare closed-door interview under oath with the House Judiciary Committee. After controversial text messages from FBI agent Peter Strzok and FBI lawyer Lisa Page, Republicans predict hard questions on political bias in the Clinton email and Russia investigations.
There is a whole host of things that Mr. Comey knows, and he's made statements on. Some of them haven't been consistent.
With a special counsel prosecuting Trump associates for lying, Republicans want Comey to explain why he apparently did not pursue similar allegations against Hillary Clinton over her congressional testimony about her email use. The Comey transcript could be released as early as Saturday. The former FBI director said the move is the closest he can get to a public hearing, Brett.
Catherine, there's also new information tonight about the evidence in the Clinton Foundation investigation.
Next week, Congressman Mark Meadows, chairman of the House Freedom Caucus, is holding a subcommittee hearing on the investigation into the Clinton Foundation. As you recall, a year ago, the U.S. Attorney in Utah, John Huber, was tasked by then Attorney General Jeff Sessions with the Clinton Foundation, among other issues. Tonight, Meadows confirms to Fox News 3 whistleblowers have come forward with hundreds of pages of evidence of potential wrongdoing, to include the misappropriation of funds and quid pro quo. The Clinton Foundation has consistently maintained that it is a charity and never traded on Hillary Clinton's position as Secretary of State. Brett.
We will follow all of these threads. Catherine, thank you.
You're welcome.
A private burial service for President George H.W. Bush just wrapped up in College Station, Texas. This follows one last farewell, a funeral service in President Bush's adopted hometown of Houston, and a last train ride between the two locations with amazing images. Correspondent Alicia Cunha wraps up today's memorials from College Station.
George Herbert Walker Bush, more than 1,000 family and friends of the 41st president gathering at St. Martin's Episcopal Church in Houston, remembering and honoring the late leader through scripture read by his grandchildren.
The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want.
And song by country singers the Oak Ridge Boys.
Amazing grace.
And Reba McEntire.
And forgive us our debts.
As well as remembrances by former Secretary of State and longtime friend James Baker. Baker praising Bush's love of country.
George Bush was a charter member of the greatest generation. His wish for a kinder, gentler nation was not a cynical political slogan. It came honest and unguarded from his soul.
Recalling his sense of humor.
He would look at me and he'd say, Baker, if you're so smart, why am I president and you're not?
And his gift of friendship.
Our glory, George, was to have had you as our president and as such a friend.
His oldest grandson, George Prescott Bush, recalling fond memories of his beloved Gampy.
Always the competitor, each night Gampy challenged all of the grandkids to the coveted First to Sleep award.
And how he always made time to help others.
He left a simple yet profound legacy to his children, to his grandchildren, and to this country. Service.
After the funeral, the last leg of the former president's journey was made by rail, only the 8th presidential funeral train and the first since Dwight Eisenhower. The custom-made Union Pacific locomotive is numbered 4141 for the 41st president and painted the same sky blue as Air Force One. The train slowing down for thousands who came to pay their final respects as it carried Bush's body some 70 miles to College Station and his final resting spot at his presidential library, where he was privately buried next to his beloved wife Barbara and daughter Robin.
And for as public as the Bush family is, and the farewells this week were shared by all per their request, the final goodbye was private. Theirs alone. Brett.
Alicia, thank you. Up next, new concerns over whether North Korea is telling the truth about cutting its nuclear weapons and long-range missile programs. As you look live one last time, College Station, Texas, the final resting place of President George H.W. Bush. Rest in peace. One of 2 Marine aviators recovered after the crash of a fighter jet and a refueling tanker near Japan has died. The other is in fair condition tonight. Search efforts continue to locate the other 5 missing personnel. The Marines say the 2 planes collided during routine training off the Japanese coast. There are new concerns tonight that North Korea is not limiting its nuclear program, but is in fact expanding a major missile base. This comes as the president's top diplomat meets with his North Korean counterpart. More on that tonight from State Department correspondent Rich Edson.
North Korea is expanding a missile base deep in its mountainous interior near its border with China. Quote, because of that location, the base is a strong candidate to receive North Korea's newer missiles, including those that can strike the United States. That's the assessment of the Middlebury Institute of International Studies, a California-based graduate school, and Planet Labs. Researchers evaluating new satellite images say they show North Korea continues work on the Yongjae-dong missile base and a suspected new facility nearby. They say Kim Jong-un continues producing and deploying nuclear-armed missiles, just as he ordered in January before meeting in June with President Trump in Singapore. The State Department refuses to comment on the report, as there are concerns U.S. efforts to disarm North Korea are stuck.
President Trump's trying to give the North Koreans a chance to live up to the commitments they made at the Singapore summit. He's held the door open for them. They need to walk through it.
This morning, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo met with South Korea's foreign minister, where the State Department says they again discussed North Korea's nuclear arsenal. The administration points to the ongoing discussions with the North Korean government and suspended nuclear and missile tests as progress, though offers little evidence North Korea is actually dismantling its weapons.
The bottom line is, if they want out from underneath the UN Security Council resolution sanctions, they're going to have to make progress.
The next step appears to be another meeting between President Trump and Kim Jong-un to try to agree to some specifics on how exactly North Korea would dismantle its nuclear weapons program. The president says he'll likely meet with Chairman Kim next month or the month after. Brett?
Rich Edson at the State Department. Rich, thanks. Up next, why Elizabeth Warren's path to the Democratic presidential nomination in 2020 seems to be getting a little bumpier. We'll explain. First, beyond our borders tonight, Ecuador's president is ramping up pressure on WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange to leave his country's embassy in London. Lenin Moreno says Britain has provided sufficient guarantees that Assange will not be extradited to face the death penalty abroad. Assange has been at the embassy since 2012. Procedural move from Bolivia and the Arab states. The outgoing ambassador sought to have Hamas condemned by the UN for the first time over its terror activities against Israel. Just some of the other stories beyond our borders tonight. We'll be right back. Undocumented workers, illegal aliens, reportedly are employed at President Trump's New Jersey golf course. That's according to the New York Times. It quotes one of the workers as saying she has been a housekeeper at the Trump National Golf Club in Bedminster, New Jersey for more than 5 years. She alleges there are other illegal immigrants working there as well. The Trump organization has just responded minutes ago saying, quote, "We have tens of thousands of employees across our properties and have very strict hiring practices. If any employees submitted false documentation in an attempt to circumvent the law, they will be terminated immediately." One of the Democrats expected to launch a serious campaign for the party's presidential nomination in 2020 is facing new questions tonight. Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts is said to be having a hard time with reaction to her latest effort at fighting back criticism of her claims about Native American ancestry. Correspondent Peter Ducey makes sense of all of that and her prospects tonight.
This is Elizabeth Warren.
Senator Elizabeth Warren made a big splash when she revealed she had a sliver of Native American in her family tree.
What do the facts say?
The facts suggest that you absolutely have a Native American ancestor in your pedigree.
But that pedigree only includes between 1/64th and 1/1024th Native American. And now, the New York Times reports that, quote, advisors close to Ms. Warren say she has privately expressed concern that she may have damaged her relationships to Native American groups and her own standing with activists, particularly those who are racial minorities. Warren insisted today she has no regrets.
I have put it all out in public. I put out 10 years of tax returns, my hiring records, and DNA tests all out there on the internet for anybody to see.
But progressives aren't the only ones crying foul. The Cherokee Nation condemned the possible presidential candidate in October, explaining, quote, using a DNA test to lay claim to any connection to the Cherokee Nation or any tribal nation, even vaguely, is inappropriate and wrong. And President Trump piled on.
I used to go around saying, I have more Indian blood than you do, and I have none. And I was right.
Warren has been hiring staff and making speeches and taking meetings, including with Barack Obama, that seem to be positioning her for a presidential campaign.
The world changed in 2016. It changed again in 2018. I believe it's going to change again in 2020.
And 2020 is still on the table despite this possible setback.
It's important to be transparent. I think that's how public officials should be. We've had a lot of good, thoughtful conversations about it, and that's how we learn.
Warren's hometown paper is selling its stock in a 2020 run. The Boston Globe just posted an editorial describing Warren as a divisive figure, and that's a problem for the Globe, which thinks that only a unifying figure can match up with and beat President Trump. Brett?
Peter Ducey live on the Hill. Peter, thanks. The North Carolina Republican Party says it would be open to a new congressional election if an investigation were to find a high likelihood that wrongdoing swayed that race. The state elections board is trying to determine if absentee ballot irregularities could have changed the outcome of the 9th District congressional contest. Unofficial ballot totals have Republican Mark Harris leading Democrat Dan McCready by 905 votes. But the state elections board refused to certify the results last week because of questions involving mail-in ballots. Just moments ago, McCready withdrew his concession. A political power struggle tonight in Wisconsin as Republican lawmakers try to ease the sting of losing the governor's seat there by restricting power of the incoming Democratic chief executive. Senior correspondent Mike Tobin looks at how they're trying to do that and if it will work.
Liberal protesters were back in Wisconsin's state capitol, furious that the Republican majority used the lame duck session to pass laws diminishing the power of incoming governor-elect Democrat Tony Evers, who narrowly ousted conservative hero Scott Walker.
As soon as the election was over, and they decided they didn't like who was coming into office, and so they wrote some bills to restrict his power.
A month after Wisconsin Republicans lost all statewide races, they maintain a majority in both houses. So they passed bills giving the legislature control over an economic development agency, and many bills limiting the governor's power, including the ability to issue regulations. The incoming Democrat says his first move is to appeal to Walker.
We're looking forward to making sure that people of Wisconsin connect with the governor, the present governor, and
encourage him to veto this bill.
Wisconsin Republicans also targeted the Attorney General with legislation removing his ability to withdraw from lawsuits, which means the incoming Democrat cannot back out of a challenge to Obamacare, a key issue in the campaign.
The legislature is trying to put its judgment in place of the judgment of the voters of Wisconsin.
Republican lawmakers say the flurry of bills simply guarantees that both the legislative and executive branches will have an equal seat at the table.
I do not believe that a single stroke of the pen by a governor of either party should be able to undo the work of the legislature in negotiation with the executive branch.
In Michigan, demonstrators have been out in force after the Republican-controlled legislature used the lame duck session to pass bills slowing a minimum wage increase and weakening an initiative for paid sick leave. The state Senate passed a bill stripping the incoming Secretary of State's oversight of campaign finance laws. Michigan's outgoing Republican Governor Rick Snyder is waiting to review the bills. In Wisconsin, Governor Walker also will not say if he will sign. Governor-elect Evers says if Walker refuses to veto, the courts are an option. Brett.
Mike Tobin in our Midwest Bureau. Mike, thanks. A possible new Attorney General nominee, plus how the arrest of a Chinese tech executive, concerns about U.S.-China trade, and continued problems in the tech world are driving down the markets. We'll talk about all of that with the panel when we come back.
The president certainly is entitled to his choice as FBI director. And while I admire Jim Comey a lot, I think he's contributed a lot to the country. He's enormously gifted. He crossed the basic line back in July, a fundamental line in the department, which is that investigations are supervised and directed by the lawyers, the prosecutors at the department, not the agents.
William Barr, said to be the leading contender to be the next nominee for Attorney General, take over for Jeff Sessions. Obviously now acting is Mr. Whitaker, but William Barr was Attorney General before, under the 41st President of the United States. He said not only that comment you heard there about Comey, but has written numerous things, including about the Mueller prosecutors. Prosecutors who make political contributions are identifying fairly strongly with a political party. I would have liked to see Mueller have more balance in this group, obviously talking about the Democratic Party. Those two statements alone, very positive, one would think, from the president's point of view. But what about this choice? Well respected from Republicans and Democrats up on Capitol Hill. And we don't know if it's a fact, but it looks like it's heading that way. Let's bring in our panel. David Brody, Chief Political Analyst for the Christian Broadcasting Network, National Security Analyst Morgan Ortagus, and Josh Kraushaar, Political Editor for the National Journal. Josh, surprised by this name?
It's a little surprising, but I think it's apropos that the week that we're honoring and commemorating George H.W. Bush, we have his former Attorney General looking like he may be the next successor to Jeff Sessions. It's a reminder that President Trump may talk a tough game about the Mueller investigation, but his instincts and his administration's instincts is to go in an establishment direction. And Barr is a very establishment pick. He's someone who is not like Jeff Sessions. He's a corporate attorney, and he's someone who has defended the president on numerous occasions, but he doesn't seem to be a Trump loyalist. So,
you say he's a corporate attorney. He's a partner at Kirkland Ellis.
Or Ingram, standing by in D.C.
Hannity, it was amazing to see all the former presidents together. I mean, we have such a rough and tumble political world and political life here in Washington especially. And it is kind of sad that it takes something like this for everyone to pause, and most people, not everybody, people to pause and appreciate a life, as you said, well lived, and a man who immense patriotism and love of family and love of country. And it's as simple as that. It's just nice when that can happen.
You know what
It
bothers
doesn't happen
me?
often.
It bothers me, though, that they can't say a good thing in life when somebody's running. Yeah. And as Michael Goodwin said, Democrats love Republicans when they're dead, but how did they treat them in life would be more telling.
Yeah, it's transparent. I mean, everybody's been outed on this, okay? Because I actually was here when they were saying those things. I was a law clerk at the Supreme Court when they were trashing H.W. Bush, and they loved it. He was a blue blood from Connecticut.
He's a gentleman. He's a wimp.
But they said that they made him out to be not very smart, believe it or not. So anyway, it's great that people can take this moment. We know who's telling the truth, who's been naughty and who's been nice. We had a great show. We had a great show.
By the way, you're getting coal in your stocking, Ingram. You deserve it. You're in trouble all the time.
Wait, okay.
Just saying.
I have something on its way to you already, by the way. You like McDonald Land gift certificates, right? Those ones with the...
Oh, great.
50 cents
McDonald's gift certificate.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
All right, Hannity,
I love
great
McDonald's.
show.
I'm good with it.
Me too.
Thanks.
All right. I'm Laura
Have a good
Ingram.
show.
This is the Ingram Angle from Washington, D.C. Ahead, we have a packed show for you tonight. Does the left think half of America is not just wrong, but really stupid? Well, it's a serious question, and one that's now front and center, given some recent comments by Democratic leaders. I'm going to explain in just a few moments. Plus, did a Massachusetts district court judge actually help a fugitive illegal alien evade ICE custody? A federal investigation has now been launched. We have the details. They're going to knock your socks off, okay? Again, I'm from New England, and New England is always surprising me. And also tonight, one leftist celeb is taking aim at black NRA members tonight, a debate about the continued marginalization of African-American conservatives later in the show. And more Christmas songs have been banned by the very unfun, no, they're fun killers on the left. They're killing fun all over the country. And some disgusting Christmas toys, though, are all the rage. We're going to examine the body language of George H.W. Bush's funeral. Believe it or not, there's some people speculating that certain people were, well, we'll tell you. And that's Seen and Unseen with Raymond Arroyo. But first, Democrats defining intelligence down. That's the focus of tonight's angle. Now, despite their big gains in the House and the midterms, Democrats still may not get it. They have a new line. They've been testing it out. All right, ready for this? They're now the smartest people in the room who have all the answers, even if you're too stupid to understand it.
One of the things that we Democrats have a really hard time is connecting to people's hearts instead of here. We're really good at shoving out all the information that touch people here but not here. We Democrats know so much that is true, and we have to kind of tell everybody how smart we are, and so we have a tendency to be very left-brain.
Now, lest you think this is some isolated idea, all right, that we're just so smart we have trouble connecting with you. It's actually something that's shared fairly widely. And two of the latest forebearers, by the way, of the Democratic Party.
Do you really think Donald Trump has the temperament to be commander-in-chief? Imagine him in the Oval Office facing a real crisis.
He just says, well, I'm going to negotiate a better deal. What magic wand do you have? And usually the answer is he doesn't have an answer.
This office has a way of waking you up. His positions or predispositions that don't match up with reality, he will find shaken up pretty quick.
Okay. The obvious implication being that Donald Trump and those Americans who voted for him are just a bunch of dumb rubes. Now, let's face it. When Trump won in 2016, look, you can see Obama there. He's still shell-shocked back in November 2016. Well, Trump embarrassed a lot of the so-called experts, the consultants, the pollsters, the strategists, all the big thinkers in the establishment class. So feeling suddenly diminished, they lashed out at Trump, belittling his intelligence.
The problem here is that the president doesn't read. We know that.
Isn't it remarkable how little confidence Donald Trump's own lawyers have in him? That they think he's too stupid to sit across a table with Robert Mueller?
Almost caveman-like.
Have you seen that?
It really is. He's like Fred Flintstone running the country.
It's a man without curiosity. It's a man who doesn't read. It's a man with an attention span of a rabid tsetse fly.
Okay. Well, that's going back at Mark Shields. Well, they said similar things, by the way, about Reagan. Until he died, of course, and then they all pretended that they never said any of the mean stuff they said about him for his 2 terms in office. Liberals claim to be for the little guy. You know, they're the champions of the average person. But they're really elitist snobs at heart. Maureen Dowd, New York Times columnist, used to write these pieces mocking the cultural and culinary tastes of Bush 41 and Barbara. You know, he ate pork rinds, and the two of them watched things like America's Funniest Home Videos on TV on Sunday nights. The subtext was always, look at the Bushes, Ivy League blue bloods, but still unsophisticated and, frankly, not all that smart. Well, here's a news flash for everybody. No one who becomes president is dumb, especially not Trump, who managed to beat not one, but two political dynasties to win the White House. Remember all the dire predictions made by all those political and business savants about a Trump presidency?
If the unlikely event happens and Trump wins, you will see a market crash of historic proportions.
In the event Donald wins, I have no doubt in my mind the market tanks.
Donald Trump is moving us toward World War III.
The lack of a diplomatic and serious engagement strategy, in my view, has us sliding toward war by next summer.
We can just play this all night long. Let's not even have a show, because that is really entertaining. Democrats and their allies imply that they have a monopoly on intelligence and brainpower. But if that's true, why have they screwed things up so badly when they had the chance to fix them? While Trump identified the threats, for instance, posed by China, and has challenged them, who can forget Bill Clinton pushing for China's acceptance on the world stage with his misguided WTO push?
This agreement is a good deal for America. Our products will gain better access to China's market, but China gains no new market access to the United States. We'll gain tough new safeguards against surges of imports and maintain the strongest possible rules against dumping products that have hurt Americans in the past.
Oh, my God. Rhodes Scholar, Yale undergrad, Yale Law School, and like many others, he didn't see the obvious coming. China has manipulated and distorted world markets, engaged in blatant ransacking of our intellectual property, and dumped heavily subsidized products into the United States, leading to the loss of millions of U.S. jobs. The CEO of Minnesota's Cambria, it makes quartz countertops, told us earlier this week how China targets U.S. manufacturers for the sole purpose of destroying them and then dominating the market.
They're subsidized by their government. The People's Republic of China is not a friendly participant in a free enterprise economy in America. They subsidize their companies, they run their banks, they're state-owned, and they're going after American manufacturing.
But no worries, because Democrats have all the answers. Now, remember President Obama assuring us, by the way, that his cabinet would be staffed with the best and the brightest?
We're on track to flip the switch on October 1st.
We are on track to have the marketplace up and running on October 1st. I'm confident that we will be up and running and on track on October 1st.
I mean, nobody says the site is working the way we want it to. Certainly the president acknowledged that yesterday. No one could be more frustrated than I am and the president that this isn't smooth.
All right, $120 million or so, right, to get that website? Was it more? And they couldn't get a website working. Like a freshman at MIT could get the website working. Now, who can forget the Obama administration's foreign policy flops? Again, these are the smart people, remember. Mazie Hirono said, we're too smart for our own good. Remember when he designated the Muslim Brotherhood as moderate Islamists in Egypt? And he called Iran's President Rouhani a moderate reformer?
We are encouraged that President Rouhani received from the Iranian people a mandate to pursue a more moderate course. Iran's genuine commitment to go down a different path will be good for the region and the world.
It's been awesome so far. And how about all the geopolitical geniuses at Hillary's State Department allowing our ambassador to travel to Benghazi when we knew about repeated security threats and an unstable situation on the ground? He and 3 others ended up dead. Trump removed the rose-colored glasses, and what he did is he confronted the rogue powers in the region as they exist. Trump's foreign policy is more pragmatic and prudent. He doesn't believe in nation building, nor does he believe passivity is the answer in the face of real threats. But the Democrats, they feel like Come on, they have the wind at their backs now. Forget all this stuff that happened, all our predictions that came out. Well, they didn't come out to be true at all. But they feel like they have a head of steam now, and maybe you can kind of understand it. They picked up 40 seats in the House. But right now, what I'm seeing, there is very little evidence that they've learned much about America. Why they voted in the first place for Donald Trump, and why they still support so many of his policies, especially on trade and immigration. And for all the Democrats' star power, they couldn't win the big races in Florida, Texas, or Georgia. Why not? I'll tell you why. In part, they have not come to terms with the fact that their decades of errors paved the way for Donald Trump. But I'll tell you this, at least Senator Claire McCaskill, of course, she lost her re-election bid, she seemed to have learned something.